It is indisputably the case that Trump has the constitutional authority to act as he did in Washington, D.C. With that in mind, it is also possible that a federal district court judge could, in the D.C. area, question whether Trump has that power, particularly Boasberg and the anti-Trump contingent of the district court judges. So the media will chase whatever the district court judges do, but remember, the Ninth Circuit, I believe, one of the federal district court judges, a brother of Stephen Breyer, if I'm not mistaken, in the San Francisco area, said that Trump didn't have the right to call in the guard in L.A., and almost immediately that was reversed as it moved up the legal hierarchy. But it wouldn't shock me if a judge said that Trump can't do what he clearly can do because many of these judges are basically politicians in robes. And so he can indisputably do this. Lawyers everywhere who have even spent a scintilla of time studying this, not a difficult case, but that doesn't mean that some judge might not say, well, I don't think he can do it, for some reason, just to write an opinion to get a lot of attention.
This is what we're going to see. Are the hashtag resistance judges in D.C. willing to? Remember, this is not an interpretation of like a broad spectrum authority that the president has. This is specifically in the District of Columbia and looking at a law passed in 1973 that has been good law for 50 years that deals exactly with this issue that says Trump can do this. Trump has 30 days, he can do this. It says it in the law. Are we going to have a judge that comes along? I could go either way.
I think it's 50-50. I think it's 50-50 whether a judge will say that he can't do it. Eventually, judges will say he can, but there might be one judge who says he cannot.
It's fascinating, though, because you see this. Judges no longer, when it comes to Trump and the hashtag resistance judiciary, there's no longer the fear of embarrassment at being completely slapped down 9-0. Remember when they tried to kick Trump off the ballot in Colorado? I think they talked about it in Maine, right? But they actually were moving forward on it in Colorado. Supreme Court 9-0. Even Sotomayor, even Ketanji Brown Jackson were like, guys, I mean, we got to pretend at least, right? This is not even pretending to care what the law says. This is pretty close to that for me based on the reading of the 1973 Home Rule Act. If a judge manages to come up with some way to stop Trump on this, it's just a judge saying, I don't like Trump. They're not even pretending the law matters.
I also think this is where there should be some consequences when judges engage in behavior that's way outside the bounds of what the law is. When you get lifetime tenure, there's virtually nothing that happens to any of these federal district court judges. Sure, there's a measure of embarrassment on some level for people who want to actually apply the law. But I think in many ways that's canceled out by other judges giving them pats on the back and saying, way to stand up to that tyrant, way to stand up to that authoritarian. This is what judges should do. And honestly, I think if you get overruled 9-0, I think you should actually have a consequence. A good example, as you were just pointing out, the Colorado Supreme Court. Everybody wants to forget about it because now they're saying, redistricting is putting democracy on the ballot and all these things. The state of Colorado voted to pull Donald Trump off of the ballot and not allow people there to vote for him. And the Colorado Supreme Court said 4-3, that's appropriate. We can do this looking at the federal Constitution. And then the actual Supreme Court looked at it and said 9-0, no, this is unacceptable. But all of those people in Colorado, there were no consequences for them being wrong. There were no consequences. We barely even talk about what they tried to do. And what was it, Maine, that followed up? There were multiple states that were willing to get in line and say Trump was disqualified from being able to be eligible for president of the United States. If that's not an actual legal insurrection, what is? That's the phrase Kathy Hochul used to describe Texas redistricting. Pulling a candidate off the ballot and not allowing your citizens to vote is, to me, a level of attack on basic democracy and the process of electing president.
That may have been
by
the
far.
worst judicial overreach we've seen in the Trump era against Trump. I could because it's when you think of it, they also were just deciding that there was no process to speak of. I mean, they just said, yeah, Trump did a thing I don't like, so he can't be on the ballot. You can't.
And you can't even point to that just being one judge, Buck, which is why I find it so troubling. The Colorado Supreme Court, I believe there's 7 Supreme Court justices in the state of Colorado, voted 4-3, we're going to do this. So that actually went through the entire Colorado court system, and they said yes. And then they got slapped down 9-0. And I'm mentioning it now, and I bet a lot of you are just now thinking, oh, yeah, I totally forgot about that, because there's so many legal process and procedures that have been put in place since then. I think that was, of all of them, the most egregious. And so when you hear somebody like Kathy Hochul, governor of New York, say, oh, this is a legal insurrection, referring to Texas redistricting, I think it's important to remember what they did legitimately in trying to take Trump off the ballot. And it had to go all the way to the Supreme Court to put his name on the ballot. I can't think of anything that's even remotely comparable that any Republican has ever done that is a legal attack of a similar nature on Democrats.
Meanwhile, there are Democrats out there. This is as somebody who's been in Baghdad during a war, I got to tell you, here's Tiffany Cross, Democrat, saying, I guess this was over at CNN, MSNBC, tomato, it's all the same these days. Here she is saying, remember, she's upset. This is cut 5. She's upset not because D.C. is dangerous, but because there are too many people who are there to make it safer on the streets. Play 5.
I mean, this is frightening. I kind of disagree with you both. It's not a distraction, and the way we're normalizing fascism is frightening. I left D.C. today. It looked like Baghdad. The way that the National Guard has taken over, the way that they have militarized the police force there, it is scary. And so the fact that he has previously threatened to have Gavin Newsom arrested. He had Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary. I mean, for her, killing puppies is business as usual. She's not in any position to even be qualified to oversee a department with this. ICE does not have the authority to arrest anybody. He is deploying them, like you said, like it's his own personal police force.
Just ignoring everything that's true and just saying things that are crazy and emotionally charged. And even a shot about Noam's puppies in the past. Clay,
she did leave herself open to that, but I'm
not defending it. I'm just saying, this is a kitchen sink strategy. It's fascism, attacking Noam for the dog thing, all this stuff. She's going all in on this instead of just saying for a second, hold on. First of all, there are. I've seen plenty of. There was an armory near where I grew up in New York. You see people in military uniforms all the time. Why is it scary to see people from the National Guard? Why would that be a bad thing? This is a little bit like why police on your block should make you feel safer. And if they don't, you should ask why.
I agree. And anybody out there who doesn't want more police is probably doing something illegal. And here's a big question. Worst case scenario, Trump does all this additional mobilization of resources to help try to make D.C. safer, and the crime rate stays basically the same. That's the worst case scenario. Absolute worst case scenario. Has anybody really considered what happens if it works? Imagine if Trump brings these resources to bear on the District of Columbia and suddenly violent crime drops by 40%. Look at what he did on the border, where basically nobody talks about the border. It's important sometimes to remember stories that were big. Oh, Trump can't be on the ballot. He's not constitutionally eligible to be president. It just vanishes. Nobody even mentions it. The border, nobody mentions it at all. Has anybody really thought, this is why I love the move that Trump is making, I don't see a downside. Democrats say, hey, we've got too many police. Most people say, well, we should, if you're upset about too many police, you're probably a criminal. The only person who's upset about a drunk driving test
checkpoint
is the person who's driving drunk, right? Like if you're driving, you know how the person, they can catch you because some guys are like, uh-oh, and you turn and go the opposite direction and they pull you over. If you see a drunk driving checkpoint, it's probably a sign that you may have been drinking. The only people upset about drunk driving checkpoints are people that might have been drinking. To me, the only people upset about more police on the streets are people who are actually engaged in criminal behavior. But, Buck, what if it works? What if in 2 months we have a 50% decline in violent crime in D.C.? What if carjacking plummets? What if the number of murders plummet? What do Democrats do then? And worst case scenario, nothing changes, and the problems are so intractable in D.C. right now that more troops and more police on the ground don't impact things. But I just see this as brilliant. When you analyze risk reward, if the risk is zero and the reward is massive, that to me seems like something you should do in all facets of life. And that, to me, is this.
Yeah, and yet they're still going to scream about this and say that it is fascism. Have you written your will yet or done something as important as establishing a trust? Here's a little inside tip on both. They're no longer expensive or time-consuming thanks to our sponsor, trustandwill.com. They can help you create one or both without having to find and hire an attorney. It's important to do this because your trust or will eventually become your voice. You don't want your family scrambling after the fact because if there's no will or trust left behind, your estate can be tied up in probate for months or longer, depending on the state. Set your family up the right way at the time it's needed most. The website to get started is trustandwill.com/buck. When you go there, you'll save 20%. That's trustandwill.com/buck, trustandwill.com/buck.